All right, welcome back. This is DS Yvonne at reprogrammingmind.com, and today we're going to look at the Dr. Joe Dispenza book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. Now, in the past, we've looked at part one, so today we're going to get into part two, which is about your brain and meditation. So we're going to start here with chapter 6. Now, chapter 6 is called Three Brains: Thinking to Doing to Being. And the intention behind part two is simply put to provide information about the brain so that when you, as its operator, begin to use the meditation process to change your life, that you'll know what needs to happen in your brain and in your meditations and why. All right, so first thing is that change begins with thinking. We can immediately form new neurological connections and circuits that reflect our new thoughts, and nothing gets the brain more excited than when it's learning and assimilating knowledge and experience. These are like aphrodisiacs for the brain because, in a sense, it's touching every signal it receives from our five senses. So every second, it's processing billions of bits of data. It analyzes, examines, identifies, extrapolates, classifies, and files information, which it can retrieve for us on an as-needed basis. So really, the human brain is like the planet's ultimate supercomputer. Now, I'm sure in the past you remember when Dr. Joe Dispenza was talking about how the nerve cells that fire together wire together. Okay, well, this is known as Hebbian learning. Well, the reverse of that is also true, which is that nerve cells that no longer fire together also no longer wire together. So, in other words, if you don't use it, you lose it. So let's say a person had a problem with alcoholism, or they were just having a difficult time being able to bounce back after a breakup, or they were looking to create some kind of new business in their life. In any case, some kind of new transition or new trajectory is wanted in their lives. If they had stopped thinking about those old ways, the less and less that those kinds of thoughts are brought forth and called to attention, then more and more those connections begin to die off and begin to prune away. So that's how people are able to let go of some of the stuff that they've been holding on to. And then this, in a sense, helps to rewire the brain. Now, this is what neuroscientists call pruning and sprouting, and it's what Dr. Joe Dispenza calls unlearning and learning. And it creates the opportunity for us to rise above our current limitations and to be greater than our conditioning or circumstances. So, in creating a new habit of being ourselves, we are essentially taking conscious control over what had been an unconscious process of being. So, given that to change our lives, we first have to change our thoughts and our feelings and then do something, right? Change our actions or our behaviors to have a new experience, which in turn produces a new feeling. And then we must memorize that feeling until we move into a new state of being, which really means when mind and body are one. Now, along with the brain being able to change itself in response to experience, which is called neuroplasticity, we could also say that we have more than one brain to work with. In effect, we could say we have three of them. Now, for this chapter, Dr. Joe Dispenza focuses on limiting this chapter to those functions of the three brains that relate specifically to breaking the habit of being ourselves. And these three parts of the brain would be the neocortex, the limbic brain, and the cerebellum. Our thinking brain is the neocortex. This is like the brain's walnut-like outer covering. And this is the newest, most advanced neurological hardware for humanity. The neocortex is the seat of the conscious mind, our identity, and other higher brain functions. Essentially, this neocortex is the brain's architect or designer. It allows you to learn and remember and reason, analyze and plan and create, speculate on possibilities and invent and communicate. Since this area is where you log sensory data, such as what you see and hear, this neocortex plugs you into external reality. So in general, this neocortex processes knowledge and experience. So first you gather knowledge in the form of facts or semantic information, prompting the neocortex to add new synaptic connections and circuits. Second, once you decide to personalize or apply that knowledge you have acquired to demonstrate what you have learned, you will create a new experience. And this causes patterns of neurons called neural networks to form in the neocortex. So just imagine, like, let's say we'll use this as an example. You wanted to become a designer, a website designer, and you had no skills, no clues about it. But the next thing you know, you went to a meetup and you met a friend and they knew how to do some web design and they introduced you to another friend and then another friend. Next thing you know, you've got this whole network of friends that are all capable of doing web design. Well, the brain is kind of like that too. As you're learning something, it ends up creating this network where they all begin to hold hands and create this net, if you will, to be able to capture more and more information. So if the neocortex had a motto, it might be that knowledge is for the mind. Okay, so these networks reinforce the circuitry of what you've already learned intellectually. Your neocortex is responsible for processing ideas that you have not yet experienced, which exist as a potential for you to embrace at some future time. So let's say, I don't know, let's say a person is looking for alcoholics rehabilitation or something. Now, they may not have ever thought of what it would be like to be sober and at a party and to not have a drink, right? That would be a new kind of idea. But as a person begins to entertain those new thoughts, they begin to think about modifying their behavior so they can do something differently when the opportunity presents itself in order to have a new outcome. And then as you alter your routine actions and typical behaviors, something different from the norm should happen, which will produce a new event for you to experience. All right, so now let's get into the second brain, which is the limbic brain, which processes chemicals to help us remember experiences. And this is a very emotional part of the brain. The limbic brain, also known as the mammalian brain, is located under the neocortex, and it's the most highly developed and specialized area of the brain in mammals, other than humans, dolphins, and other primates. So just think of this limbic brain as the chemical brain or the emotional brain. Now, this limbic brain assists in forming long-term memories. You can remember any experience better because you can recall how you felt emotionally while the event was occurring. And so the neocortex and the limbic brain together enable us to form what's called declarative memories, meaning that we can declare what we've learned or experienced. And because this limbic brain helps us to remember things that were quite emotionally charged, then our experiences can be marked emotionally by these highly charged experiences. And if this limbic brain had a motto, it might be experience is for the body. So if knowledge is for the mind and experience is for the body, then when you apply knowledge and create a new experience, then you're teaching the body what the mind has intellectually learned. So it's not just about learning the information, but embracing it with your emotions. Just to give you a little silly example, you may not remember the 15th day that you went to school. You may not remember the third time that you did, kissed somebody, but you probably remember the first love. You probably remember the first day that you went to school because there was a lot of emotion involved. So this is a part of the limbic brain. That's what it's doing. It's learning, linking, and storing associations to events in the outside world and then attaching it to emotions because, hey, this is really important stuff. Your brain wants to make sure that you survive, and so it has these emotions there to let you know, hey, danger, or hey, friend or foe. All right, so instead of remembering it intellectually, we remember it and embody that knowledge with our emotions inside of this limbic system. All right, so now that we've got this neocortex to be able to process information, now that we've got this emotional system to be able to weave these two things together, now we're going to talk about the third part, which is the cerebellum, which stores habitual thoughts, attitudes, and behavior. So remember when Joe Dispenza was talking about the time he forgot his locker combination? Or maybe a time where you didn't quite remember your ATM PIN number, but as soon as your fingers kind of went up to the keypad, your body just kind of went doot, 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 and recalled that information. That's your cerebellum. So when the body knows equal to or better than the conscious mind, right? When you can repeat an experience at will without much conscious effort, then you have memorized the action, the behavior, the attitude, or emotional reaction until it has become a skill or a habit. So when you have reached this level of ability, you have moved into a state of being. In this process, you've activated that third brain that plays a major role in changing your life, the cerebellum, the seat of the subconscious. This is the most active part of the brain. The cerebellum is located at the back of the skull, and think of it as like the brain's microprocessor and memory center. Every neuron in the cerebellum has the potential to connect with at least 200,000 and up to 1 million other cells to process balance, coordination, awareness of the spatial relation of body parts, and execution of controlled movements. Like when you see somebody dancing or on the tightrope or doing some kind of acrobatics, or someone that's in the Olympics that they're doing some kind of gymnastic moves over and over and over, they're not thinking about where to put their elbow or their left foot or how to be able to grab something. They've got that all hardwired into their brain, and that part is in their cerebellum. So that's what that's like. So you know how you can't forget how to ride a bicycle? That's because it's hardwired and stored into your cerebellum. Okay, so this cerebellum stores certain types of simple actions and skills, along with hardwired attitudes and emotional reactions and repeated actions and habits and conditioned behaviors and unconscious reflexes and skills that we've mastered and memorized. So this thing is possessing amazing memory storage, and it easily downloads various forms of learned information into programmed states of mind and body. So when you're in a state of being, you begin to memorize a new neurochemical self, and that's when the cerebellum takes over, making that new state an implicit part of your subconscious programming. That cerebellum is the site of non-declarative memories, meaning that you've done or practiced something so many times that it becomes second nature and you don't even have to think about it. So when you've learned something and it's become, in a sense, embedded or programmed into your cerebellum, well, when that happens, you will arrive at a point when happiness or whatever attitude or behavior or skill or trait you've been focusing on and rehearsing mentally or physically will become an innately memorized program of the new self. Okay, so let's connect these dots together here. So first we'll see how through conscious mental rehearsal, the thinking brain, which is the neocortex, uses knowledge to activate new circuits and new ways to make a new mind. Then our thought creates an experience, and via the emotional brain or the limbic system, that produces a new emotion. And then our thinking and feeling brains condition the body to a new mind. Finally, if we reach the point where mind and body are working as one, then the cerebellum enables us to memorize a new neurochemical self, and our new state of being is now an innate program in our subconscious. Now, this is wonderful in theory, but for most of us, to go from thinking to doing is very, very difficult. We want to stay in the intellectual and the philosophical and make lists and plans, but actually getting ourselves to do those things can be quite challenging, right? We like to identify with those old, memorized, recognizable feelings of our familiar self. So the thing to do instead is to be surrendering those old thought patterns and interrupting those habitual emotional reactions and foregoing those knee-jerk behaviors, and then planning and rehearsing new ways of being so that you are putting yourself into the equation of that knowledge you learned and beginning to create a new mind. In a sense, you are reminding yourself who you want to be. Now, you might be wondering how you can go inside your subconscious mind to be able to change those programs where they exist. And one of these ways is to be the observer of those programs. So let's say that you're working at a job and there's someone there that you don't like, or there's some kind of new skill that you want to learn. Maybe you want to learn Photoshop, or you're trying to open up a new business, or doing something that requires definitely new programs, new ways of being. Well, as you're going about it and finding yourself kind of reverting back to those old styles and those old ways, or perhaps taking that same old route, what you can do is actually take that observer position and notice yourself being in that way. By noticing yourself and taking that meta position, it gives you the opportunity to be able to make those changes. When you can become aware of or notice who you are being, then you are becoming conscious of your unconscious self. And this is why mental rehearsal is good, because it enables you to be able to imagine and practice in your mind what it would be like and how you would behave when those situations arrive, so that it's easier for you to step into that new type of behavior, the new way of thinking, doing, and being. So as you begin to psychologically project yourself into a potential situation ahead of the actual experience, then you're beginning to rewire your neural circuitry to look as though the event had already taken place. And then once these new neural networks begin to fire in unison, then your brain has created a picture or a vision or model, or what Joe Dispenza calls a hologram, just a multi-dimensional being representing the ideal self that you are focused on becoming. And then the instant that this happens, this is when whatever you were thinking about and having it become more real than anything else, well, that's when this becomes all the more embedded into this unison of your thinking brain and your emotional brain and your body brain. I want to sum up this chapter with this one sentence here that Joe Dispenza says, where he talks about mastery. And he says, mastery is when our internal chemical state is greater than anything in our external world. And think about how important that is. Like if you're in a situation, perhaps let's say that you're in sales and the person that you're talking to is coming up with all kinds of like crazy, silly objections, or is being somewhat like annoying or frustrating. Instead of, thinking, oh, I'm losing control here, what you want to be able to do is maintain your internal state, right? You want to be able to keep yourself in check and your emotions in check so that it'll influence your external behavior. So that way you're more proactive instead of reactive, right? You can be responding to the situation instead of reacting to the situation. And so when you can do that, that's when he says, no person, no thing, and no experience at any time or place should be able to disrupt your internal chemical coherence. And so when you can maintain that control of your internal state, well, then you can think and act and feel differently whenever you choose. Because ultimately, if you can master suffering, then you can just as easily master joy. But it's easier said than done because we've got this hard wiring in place. Like, for example, let's say you have a friend that's kind of depressed a little bit and is kind of moping and groping around, and you say, hey, you want to come out to the party tonight or to the concert or to the whatever? And they'll say, no, I don't feel like it. But what's really going on is that person has memorized this emotional state of doom and gloom. And so nothing in their environment, no person, no experience, no condition, no nothing is going to move them out of that internal chemical state of suffering. For them, in a sense, it feels better to be in pain than to let go and be happy. In a sense, some people are enjoying their addiction to that kind of pain. And nothing's going to distract them away from that internal emotional dependency. Okay, so let's give some example here. Let's say that you had to go to a family function and there's some kind of relative there. It's a bit of a knucklehead and they're kind of annoying to talk to, and you just have different value systems, so you don't really see eye to eye on a couple of things, or a lot of things in that instance. Now, you might want to rehearse before you go there, trying to feel compassionate towards that person so that when you see them, that compassion and love would feel automatic and familiar to you as those self-limiting emotions that you used to have about them have changed. So now you need to replicate this experience of thinking and feeling and acting out of compassion. And so if you do, then you will break the addiction of your past emotional state and then neurochemically condition your body and mind to memorize the internal chemical state called compassion better than your conscious mind. And then ultimately, if you repeatedly recreate the experience of compassion at will, then by practicing it independent of any circumstance in your life, your body would become the mind of compassion. You would memorize compassion so well that nothing from your outside world would move you from this state of being. And then at that point, you have all three brains working together, and you are biologically, neurochemically, and genetically in a state of compassion. And so when compassion becomes unconditionally ordinary and familiar for you, then you have progressed from knowledge to experience to wisdom. Now, when I say wisdom, wisdom is accumulated knowledge that has been gained through repeated experience. And when being compassionate is as natural as suffering or judging or blaming or being frustrated or negative or insecure, then now we are wise. We are liberated to seize new opportunities because somehow life seems to organize itself equal to how or who we are being. Okay, so now we can really get into this and talk about one of evolution's great gifts to us as humans, which is the ability to go from thinking to being without taking any physical action. So said another way, we can create a state of being ahead of having any actual material experience. I sort of fake it till you make it. Right? Like if you think about somebody that upsets you and you replay that memory, you make their face bigger and brighter in your mind and you have their voice go louder, it can easily cause you to go into that state of frustration. And on the flip side, if you had some kind of like a sexual erotic thought, you have that long enough and next thing you know, your whole body will be cooperating with you quite nicely. All right, so we can use your brain to be able to change your physiological state of being. All right, so really, how far can you take this? Like through thinking and feeling alone, can you finally be that person that you want to be? Can you create and live a chosen reality? Well, that's where this meditation comes in. People use meditative techniques for a lot of reasons, as you know. Now, what meditation does is it allows us to change our brains, our bodies, and our state of being. And most important, we can make these changes without having to take any physical action or have any interaction with the external environment. Through meditation, we can install the necessary neurological hardware, just like those piano players that were doing those finger exercises and imagining them through those mental rehearsals, how it actually changed those muscles in their fingers. Well, that's mental rehearsal in action. So now I'm going to ask you to reflect on what it would feel like to be happy and content and satisfied and at peace. So, what would you envision for yourself if you were to create a new ideal of you? Essentially, the meditative process allows you to answer this question by bringing together all of the information learned and wired synaptically into your brain about what it means to be happy and content, satisfied, and at peace. See, in meditation, you can take that knowledge and then place yourself in that equation. So instead of merely asking what it would mean to be happy, you put yourself in the position of practicing and thus living in a state of happiness. After all, I mean, you know what happiness looks like and feels like. You know what would perhaps make you happy, I would think. You've had past experiences with happiness. You've seen other people's versions of it. And now you get to pick and choose from that knowledge and experience to create a new ideal of yourself. And then once you experience that new mind, well, then your brain creates a kind of holographic image that gives you a model to follow in creating your future reality, right? Because you would know what you would perhaps look like or sound like, what kind of outfit you'd be wearing, perhaps, what kind of people you'd be standing around with, the way that you'd be feeling about doing some stuff, what kind of accomplishments you might have. Okay, so you can bring all this together and simply just use your knowledge and experience of those qualities of happiness, of courage and conviction to produce this emotional effect within you. And then the result will be this state of mind. And so by repeatedly producing that state of mind, it will become familiar to you and you will be wiring in new circuits. And the more often you produce that state of mind, the more those thoughts will become the experience. And then once that thought experience transformation takes place, the end product of that experience will be a feeling and emotion. And then when this occurs, your body, as the unconscious mind, does not know the difference between an event that takes place in physical reality and the emotions you created by thought alone. So, as someone who is conditioning the body into a new mind, you'll find that your thinking brain and the emotional brain are now working in concert. Remember that thoughts are for the brain and feelings are for the body. And so, when you are both thinking and feeling in a specific way as part of the meditative process, then you are different from when you started out. The newly installed circuits, the neurological and chemical changes that have been produced by those thoughts and emotions, have altered you in such a way that there is physical evidence in the brain and body that shows those changes. And then at this point, you've moved into that state of being. You're no longer just practicing happiness or just going through the motions of gratitude or whatever. You're actually being grateful or happy, right? You can produce that state of mind and body every day. You can continually re-experience an event and produce the emotional response to that experience of how you would feel if you were that new ideal self. Now, I'm going to take an example here and actually take us away from this book by Dr. Joe Dispenza. I want to clothe what he's saying into a couple of examples by using some experiments done by Harvard neuroscientists and also by looking at one of the greatest athletes of all time. Okay, so let's take a look at a proof element here as we go to the U.S. National Library of Medicine and National Institutes of Health, where these Harvard scientists did an experiment with these meditators. And if you want to look this up, the study is called Meditation Experience is Associated with Increased Cortical Thickness. So basically, they had these two groups of people. They had a control group, and then they had this other group of long-term meditators. And what they found was that the long-term meditators had increased gray matter in the insula and the auditory and sensory cortex. And this makes sense because as these people are meditating, what they're doing is they're paying attention to sounds, which is going to cause a shift in their auditory and sensory cortex, right? Because they're paying attention to their senses, right? What are they listening to? What are they feeling? And all this kind of stuff. They're not ruminating about the past. They're just being very aware of the right now, and they are not thinking. And so they also had more gray matter in the frontal cortex, which again is associated with working memory and executive decision making. Now, maybe you're thinking, well, maybe those meditators had a bigger brain to begin with. Maybe they had a larger cortical thickness before they ever meditated in their lives. So they did an additional study where they had two groups of novices. Okay, so two groups of people, and neither of them have ever meditated before. And what they did is they measured the brains, and what happened is they would do a mindfulness-based stress reduction meditation with one group, and just a regular meditation with the other group. And what they were doing is they would have these people meditate for about 30 to 40 minutes a day for about 8 weeks. So here's what they found. They actually found 4, or actually 5, changes in the brain that happened. Okay, so changes in structure and functioning in their brain just from 8 weeks of meditation. So I'm going to go through these with you right here and now. So the primary difference found in the posterior cingulate, which is involved in mind wandering and self-relevance. Also the left hippocampus, there was growth and change there. The left hippocampus assists in learning and cognition and memory and emotional regulation. The other shift and change was in the temporoparietal junction, or the TPJ, which is associated with perspective taking and empathy and compassion. And also there was another change in the pons, which is an area of the brainstem where a lot of regulatory neurotransmitters are produced. And last, the people that were doing the mindfulness-based stress reduction, the MBSR, well, they had changes in their amygdala, right? The fight or flight part of the brain. This is part of the limbic system. This is part of the emotional part of the brain. And this is the part that is important for anxiety and fear and stress in general. Now, that area, that amygdala, got smaller in the group that went through that mindfulness-based stress reduction program. Okay, so that change in the amygdala was also correlated to a reduction in stress levels. Okay, so with just 8 weeks of meditation, there was actual physiological changes in the size of their brain relating to these areas just from meditation alone. Now let's step out of Harvard, let's step out of the MRI machines, let's get out of these laboratories and look at this from a totally different point of view. And let's find someone who might be perhaps the greatest athlete of all time. And the person I'm talking about here is a guy that's got the most Olympic medals. As a matter of fact, he has 18 gold medals. And this is, of course, Michael Phelps, that swimmer. Now, with him, what he does before he does his competitions, what he was doing when he was practicing every single day, his birthday, his Christmas, Boxing Day, the days that he doesn't feel good, he was still jumping in the pool. And before he would even start splashing around, he would meditate for 2 hours in the pool. And I'm just going to quote what his coach said. He says, "For months before a race, Michael gets into a relaxed state. He mentally rehearses for 2 hours a day in the pool. He sees himself winning. He smells the air, tastes the water, hears the sound, and sees the clock. And he also sees himself from the outside as a spectator in the stands. And he also sees himself overcoming obstacles as well." All right, so Michael Phelps would actually envision himself screwing up and falling behind in the race, and then imagining himself feeling calm and cool and still feeling energized and feeling like, this is still attainable and still winning and making great comebacks. Okay, so for every single day for 2 hours, this guy would be meditating and visualizing winning his Olympic gold medals. Okay, so now we've got like actual proof here about being able to reprogram your mind using visualization techniques, and also showing Harvard studies indicating how meditation can actually make changes and shifts in the brain, which will ultimately make changes and shifts in our behavior, in our doing, and in our thinking. And this is why I was saying that the best sentence in this whole chapter is that internal chemical state is greater than anything in our external world. All right, so now let's get back into this Dr. Joe Dispenza book, and I'm going to pick up the pace right here where Dr. Joe Dispenza says, if you can get up from your meditative session and be in that new state of being, altered neurologically, biologically, chemically, and genetically, then you have activated those changes ahead of any experience, and you will be more prone to acting and thinking in ways equal to who you are being. You have broken the habit of being yourself. If you are mentally rehearsing a new mind, there will come a moment that that thought you are thinking about will become the experience. And when this occurs, the end product of that inward experience is that emotion. And that's when your mind and body begin to work as one, and you are being that person without having to do anything yet. Kind of like that swimmer, right? Imagining himself doing all of that amazing work in the pool before he's ever actually done any of the strokes. So as you move into a new state of being, by thought alone, you'll be more prone to do things and think things equal to how you are being. And this new state of being creates a new personality. A new personality produces a new personal reality. Now here's where coherent signals really come into play. So if you can send into the quantum field a signal coherent in thought and feeling, independent of the external world, then something different will show up in your life. And when it does, you'll no doubt experience a powerful emotional response, which will inspire you to create a new reality once again. And you can use that emotion to generate an even more wonderful experience. So when your body experiences that event is occurring in that moment and it feels real to you, right? Just like Michael Phelps, right? He's imagining what the water would feel like, what the air smells like and tastes like. Right? He's using all of his sensory awareness, and the orbital frontal cortex and the rest of the integrative mechanisms in the brain, they all respond more robustly to multisensory data. So you want to be able to think about what things would, the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, and gustatory representations of that ideal self would be like in order to give your brain that more robust experience. So that the moment you're in that state of being, in that new moment, in that now moment and present in that experience, that's when you're connected to all possible realities that exist in the quantum field. Remember that if you are in the past or the future based on your familiar emotions or anticipation of some effect, then you don't have access to all possibilities in the quantum field. The only way to access the quantum field is by being in the now. So keep in mind that this isn't just about being some kind of intellectual process. These thoughts and the feelings, they must be coherent. In other words, this meditation requires that you drop down about 10 inches out of your head and move into your heart. Open your heart and think about how it would feel if you embodied a combination of all the traits that you admire and that makeup of your ideal self. Now, of course, you might object that you can't know how it would feel like because you never experienced what it's like to have those traits and to be that ideal self. And to this, Dr. Joe Dispenza's response is that your body can experience this before you have any physical evidence ahead of your senses. If a future desire that you've never experienced actually does manifest in your life, you'd have to agree that you would experience an elevated emotion such as joy or excitement or gratitude. And so those emotions are what you can naturally focus on. Instead of being enslaved to emotions that are only the residue of the past, you are now using these elevated emotions to create the future. Elevated emotions such as gratitude and love and so forth, they all have a higher frequency that'll help you to move into a state of being where you can feel as though the desired events have actually occurred. Right? Just like Michael Phelps, right? He's swimming, swimming, swimming. Right, imagining himself standing on that podium, right, imagining himself beating all those people as he's splashing around in that pool. And this is where Dr. Joe Dispenza says, if you are in a state of greatness, then the signal you send into the quantum field is that the events have already come to pass. Giving thanks allows you to emotionally condition your body to believe that what is producing your gratitude has already happened. And by activating and coordinating your three brains, meditation allows you to move from thinking to being. And once you are in that new state of being, you are more prone to act and think equal to who you are being. Now, maybe you've wondered, why it might be so hard to move into that state of gratitude or to give thanks ahead of the actual experience. Is it possible that you've been living by a memorized emotion that's become so much a part of your identity on a subconscious level that it's become like a subconscious program now that you can't even feel any other way than you've been accustomed to? Well, then, if so, maybe your identity has become a matter of how you appear to the world on the outside to distract you and change how you feel on the inside. And so we'll get into more about how to be able to change that gap as we progress further through these additional chapters. But for now, understand that when you can readily feel gratitude or joy or fall in love with the future without needing any person, thing, or experience to cause you to feel that way, then these elevated emotions will be available to fuel your creations. All right, well, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed my review of this Dr. Joe Dispenza book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, in particular with Chapter 6, and I look forward to sharing more with you in the future. And for everyone that's been commenting and leaving the thumbs ups and the thumbs down, I appreciate all of that engagement, and I look forward to sharing more with you in the future. This is DS Yvonne at reprogrammingmind.com. Bye for now.